All right, guys, you ready to get started for one last session? Yes, Chris, we're ready. Yeah. You guys are quiet now. Does the break good? Did it help you get woke up a little bit? All right, guys. So, hey, here's I don't know if it's good news or bad news. There's not 200 slides in this talk. There's 0. And so we're going to talk about a few topics, open it up for some questions, and I want to close out with a challenge for you guys in a few areas of your life. So this one, sorry, I know there's younger kids in here, but it's a topic that's pretty unavoidable today, and which happens to be one of the points of the talk. So when I do question and answer sessions with the few youth events that I don't do a lot of youth events, but at nearly every university event, there is a question that comes up in a Q&A nearly every time. And guys, I get asked about everything from the existence of aliens to you name it. I mean, it's just the whole gambit. But in today's culture, I've seen this change. I've been doing ministry for 20 years, and I've watched this question go from being somewhere in the talk or somewhere in the line of questions to being in the first 2 or 3 questions every single time I do a Q&A. And it's the question of identity, and particularly sexual identity, and the church's response to homosexuality and redefinition of marriage. With college students especially, it's huge. And so let me just talk you through the church's response to that. There's really 4 typical responses the church gives. And from here, it won't be very graphic. That was the most graphic part. I'm trying to tone it down. So because I'm Baptist, we like to stick with alliteration with A's and the first letter in each thing. So the first one, guys, is alienation. Typically, the church will respond with alienation. And alienation meaning they'll look, and that's where there's a church in Westboro, Kansas, actually, that goes along this line, has a website dedicated to hating on people. And it is that response of hatred. And guys, let me just tell you, it just doesn't line up with the biblical narrative of Jesus as he approached sin. I mean, you look, and when Jesus it's the shortest scripture in the Bible. You know what it is? Jesus wept. Guys, when Jesus was approaching Jerusalem and he was looking at all the sin that was there, he wasn't angered in that moment. The only time he was angry, actually, was with religious people. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. And guys, as you're at school, and if you have friends that are struggling in this area or going down that path, you can get frustrated with, you can get angry with, or you can realize that, man, they're dealing with a crisis in their life. They're dealing with a crisis of identity, of worth. Those 4 great philosophical questions, their answers to those questions are not good. And so we'll alienate. And we'll try to separate ourselves completely from them and not have anything to do with them. And guys, that's just not the Jesus response in that area, or any area for that matter. The next one is acceptance. So we'll accept it as normal behavior. We'll say, hey, you can come, you can be a member of the church, you can be in leadership of the church, you can, and guys, that one there, guys, that compromises what we know from the scriptures and what God's plan is and desires are for our lives. And let me just say this. Right now, the culture is saying this. The culture says, if you disagree with me, you hate me. That's what's being said in the culture right now. If I disagree with you, I hate you. Guys, that is simply not reality. That's a narrative that's being spun out there. That is not reality. I can disagree with you and not hate you. I can disagree with you and still love you and have compassion for you. Right? But we can't accept people putting their identity in something that God has not put their identity in. Trying to be as least graphic as I can in these explanations with kids. But guys, God's created you for more than that. For you to put your identity in that, in your sexual identity, God's created you for more than sex. God has created you with so much more in mind. You cannot put your identity in that. So we can't accept it as acceptable behavior, because then we're compromising the Bible. And then you get avoidance. So I travel a lot. I talk to a lot of pastors. I do a lot of training with pastors on how to be healthy as churches and how to develop leadership pipelines and visitor assimilation processes, which none of you probably care about, all that stuff. And talking to pastors, this topic inevitably comes up because they know I deal with university campuses and they know I deal with apologetics. And they say things like this: I just avoid that topic. I don't discuss that topic in our church. To which I say, you avoid the topic of marriage in your church? And they're like, no, I just don't talk about that. And I'm like, you realize in this culture, it's only a matter of time before you're not going to be able to separate those two things out in this culture. You're going to have to address this. You cannot ultimately avoid this. Satan has woven a narrative in such a way that we have to address this as the church. And then you get to the last A. It's the only biblical one of the bunch. Assurance. So I was the campus minister at a community college. And it was really interesting. When we have these student organization fairs where we have booths, for all the different organizations. And every single time we have one of those, they put the Pride organization or the homosexual organization right next to the BCM booth. Every event, without fail. And they did it thinking that I was going to be offended by or upset by this, and I wasn't. I was like, yes, please. And so I had a great time spending time with them and talking to them. I shared our BCM food and snacks, and I bought food for my staff that were staffing the booth. I bought the food for them too. And I would sit and talk with them. And then the interesting thing, we get into our semester, and what we do at community college, because it's tough to get students to come back in the evening for a worship service, is we feed lunch for free at the community college one day a week, sometimes two. Because community colleges have a lot of low-income and middle-income students, and so sometimes food's a challenge, and so we feed them free lunch on campus. And of course, I'm going to present the gospel at those lunches, and I'm going to talk through things. And sometimes what we did for lunch was I didn't have any programmatic stuff, no slides, no outline talk. I just pulled a stool up in front of all those students, and for an hour and a half, I said, hey, what are you hearing in the culture or the classroom that conflicts with your faith? Let's just talk. Let's have a conversation. And of course, inevitably, this topic comes up. And the interesting thing was, I'm at Baptist Collegiate. I don't know if you guys realize this, but us Southern Baptists aren't known for our tolerance in some things, unfortunately. And we're known as bigots, and we're known as all these things that they call us in the media, which aren't true. And yet, in our BCM lunches, at any given time, there's half a dozen from that community sitting there. They're cross-dressing, sitting there in the BCM lunch. They're sitting there next to their partner. And I'm sitting on a stool answering questions. And inevitably, one of them's going to ask me the question about that. And I walk them through these 4 A's. And I get to that last A, and I talk about assurance. I can assure you that I'm jacked up and broken in my own ways. Even without pointing to that thing that we obviously disagree on, because I do disagree with your lifestyle in that. I disagree with you putting your identity in that. Even not including that, I can assure you that I'm broken, the guy next to you is broken, this guy's broken. I can also assure you, because God loves me, I can love you. And I can assure you, I don't look at you any differently or judge your sin any differently than I do the guy next to you that's dealing with a pornography issue, or the other guy that's dealing with a pride issue, or the other guy that's dealing with this issue. Because sin is sin, and it's not my place to rank sin. That's God's job. God views sin all the same. If you've broken part of the law, you've broken all the law, he says. I view sin from God's angle on that. It's not my place to judge you. Here's what I can also assure you. I can assure you that same God loves you. And I can assure you that same God has made a way for you to have a relationship with him that you might experience that love. And I can assure you that God did a mighty work in my life, and God pulled me out of a multi-generational family of addicts and set me right. And I can assure you that in all the areas that you're broken in your life, he wants to do the same for you. Guys, that's the biblical response to the issues that are going on. I said focus on the root, not the fruit, a few times to you guys now. Do you know what I started doing with them in that community? I never even bothered. I already knew that was an issue. I didn't need to bring that up. They already knew it was an issue between me and them. I didn't need to bring it up. I focused on their identity in Christ. I focused on who God had made them to be. I focused on what God had put in them and how he knit them together. And inevitably, they always say, well, I was born this way. God made me gay. You know, science would even say, hey, we've identified the gay gene, the gay DNA sequence that causes you to have this propensity towards homosexuality. It's since been proven wrong. But they had a study that they put out there trying to say that. And so I've had a few that don't realize it's been proven wrong. They'll bring it up and I'll say, here, let me, just for a moment, let's just assume that that study is accurate and it is correct. They found a genetic predisposition towards this lifestyle. All right, I'm from a multi-generational family of addicts. I have a generational predisposition or a genetic predisposition towards addiction. Does that mean I should just walk in addiction and just give in to that predisposition just because I'm wired that way? Absolutely not. God's made me for something greater. And let's just assume for a moment you have that predisposition. You were wired this way from birth. Let me just tell you, that's a byproduct of the sin nature. Just like my predisposition towards addiction would be. That doesn't mean I have to walk in that sin. God has made me for more and better. And so I was teaching an apologetics class one time too at a Christian school, but we had a girl that played for the basketball team. And she was in the closet, had struggled with, I say in the closet, she hadn't been. She went in the closet when she came to the school. She had struggled with that, been in same-sex relationships, and hid that when she arrived at our school. And I was talking through this, and she just, like, in kind of a neat series of events we don't have time to go through. But this girl came out to me and told me what she had been struggling with. And she's living in a dorm with other girls, and she's struggling with being attracted to them. So I said, man, I'm going to start praying, not just for you. We're going to pray together, and we're going to pray together regularly. And as I prayed and as I walked her through, I took her through a Beth Moore study on identity. And that girl, God got a hold of her and radically changed the trajectory of her life. She became a missionary in Macedonia. She is now a licensed Christian family therapist down in Dallas, Texas. So I talked to her a few months back. I said, do you still struggle with that attraction? She said, oh, yeah. But I take every thought captive under the lordship of Christ. And my life is not my own. I was bought at a price, and I'm going to live for Jesus. So guys, again, the last one, that assurance, that's biblical. And not just with the homosexuality, but with all these different fruit issues that we deal with out there. Guys, as you're talking to your classmates, you can focus on their bad behavior all you want. They may change it for a time just to appease you, but it doesn't change the fact that they are broken internally inside, and they still need Jesus to radically change their heart. That's the only way that it works its way out for the long haul. All right? So there you go. There's my short talk on that particular topic that I usually give when I get asked that question. So what other questions do you guys have? Any other questions from this stuff or from other things? What questions do you have? You can ask the alien question if you want. What?
Like, do 5-day clubs teaching to children. And so 1 week is training, the next week is doing a 5-day club. Mm-hmm. And that week, I had a really tough question that I am still not sure if I answered it the right way or not. The kid asked me, why did Jesus rise again?
Why did Jesus rise? All right, so why was the resurrection necessary? It's a valid question. Actually, that's a good, deep theological question. One of the deeper theological questions I've been asked. So why is it necessary? So, guys, the law states, the law of God states that the wages of sin is death. So all that was necessary to pay for our sins actually was the death of Christ on the cross. He lived a sinless life, and he died on the cross in our place. He was our substitutionary sacrifice on the cross, therefore fulfilling the law, right? So why did he need to rise from the grave? It's a great question. The answer to that, in short, there's volumes of books written on that. But the answer to that, in short, is it demonstrated, first off, that he is God and he had power over death. and that through that resurrection from the dead, then we could also be resurrected with him. And that's why the resurrection's important. Plus, it, kind of flew in the face of all the Jews that were around there were kind of persecuting and just crucified him, that he was no longer in the grave, so that there's also the very practical reasons of the disciples could now see him risen and know that, hey, this thing he was telling us was true. He really is God. And then they would go proclaim that message. But from the law standpoint, they are correct in their question, and that he did fulfill the law in the death. The resurrection was just showing his power over the grave from that point forward. Does that make sense? Does that help you? I don't know how you answered it, but that's the way I would answer that question. What else? Okay.
Maybe a little off topic here, but one of the things I was wondering about on the timelines, and I've probably got my information totally off. It's been a long time since I went to school. How do they figure years if the world changed so much? How do they know that our 365 days at so many hours a day was the same 365 days, so many hours a day? They're saying this person lived 790 years.
Okay, well, there's a few different ways to come at that particular response. One of them is God is communicating the message of the Bible as it's written in the story of creation through a man. In this case, it's Moses. And so same reason he used the royal Egyptian cubit. He's going to use units of measurement that the writer understands as he's writing it down. And so that's one particular aspect of it. Also, you get into this whole other thing. We didn't get into this as much during the talks here, but even with the old earth creationism, you have a couple of different views there. One of them is called the gap theory. So the gap theory would state that between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, there's a gap of billions of years between those two verses. And during that time was when all the dinosaurs and geologic era and all that stuff took place. There's a whole slew of problems with that, both on a scientific and theological scale, but we don't have time for that. But then the other one's the day-age theory. All right, so the day-age theory would state that these were not literal days, but periods of time. And that's a common one that's out there. That's more common than the gap theory from most people. And so they would say that and they'll use passages like, hey, the sun and the moon weren't created till later, after the light was created. So how do they mark days before that point to know days? And again, I'm like, well, God's creating in terms they understand, or communicating in terms they understand. The other aspect of it is, if you just look at the scientific end of it, even if you're looking at slow of the Earth's spin, things like that, if you go back 6,000 years, it's literally a difference of, our day might be, 20 minutes shorter or something. Like it's not much of a difference, given the math that's involved in that particular thing, the Coriolis effect and the spin of the Earth. Now, marking time is also an interesting one because of those lineages. People will say, well, if those aren't literal years, they're periods of time, that's how it appears that Methuselah was 969 years old, because it was a different measurement of years. The problem with that you run into is, in all the books that we know of, dealing with ancient Norse mythology, going into Middle Eastern cultures, all this stuff, the units of measurement they use for those long lifespans don't add up when you look at when they had their children. Does that make sense? So, like you look at Enos being 90, all right, so he would have had, by those units of measurement that are used, and this is a whole side topic, but those units of measurement that are used in a lot of those ancient manuscripts that supposedly put doubt on that, he would have had to have been 5.5 years old when he had his kid. So like that doesn't add up. And so that argument, the timeline argument, doesn't really hold water in the long run. But again, I think God was using units of measurement that Moses understood when he recorded it, just like the Egyptian cubit. So does that help at all? Yep. But their unit of measurements don't line up when you look at their lineage. So you look at their calendar versus their lineage of their family histories. And again, either their measurement units were jacked up or they were started having kids at 5 years old. Like, it's one or the other. And so it doesn't line up in the long run. So, what else? Go ahead. You can wait for him to get the mic, or you can talk really loud.
I don't know if you've like given a hint about it, but can I ask your opinion about the Pangaea theory?
Pangaea, that's a great one. All right, so for those who don't know what Pangaea is, it's a supercontinent theory that at one point all the continents were together and connected, and it was one massive supercontinent. All right, there's a few things I'd say to that. I don't hold to the Pangaea theory, and actually a lot of secular scientists at this point say that there's a lot of problems with Pangaea. But the idea is these tectonic plates or continental crust have separated over time, forming the continents that we have now. Here's the thing, though. So what's between those continents now? The ocean, right? And if you take the water out of the ocean, you know what you find at the bottom of it? Land. And that land goes all the way around and forms the crust of the earth. There's several issues to be dealt with. You have to shrink Africa by about 35% in order for those continents to fit. You have to get rid of all of Central America. You have to rotate one continent counterclockwise while rotating another part of Europe clockwise in order for those to fit. There's just a lot of issues with Pangaea as a whole. Again, not to mention that I think the pre-flood world was a much different world with much larger landmass as a whole. Not Pangaea supercontinent, but a more completely covered with land with some small seas mixed in type environment. And so it's just not necessary to have Pangaea. Now we do know that there is tectonic shifting. We know that the tectonic plates are moving. But the fact that they're moving now doesn't indicate, you can't make the assumption that they've always been moving or that they've always been moving at the same rate. And so rate of movement and initiation of movement are also assumptions that have to be made for that. Does that make sense at all? So I'll have to say, yeah, at the end of the day, I don't dogmatically flat say, oh, Pangaea can't be right. But I do say it's got some holes and it's got some errors in it. And so, does that make sense? Yeah, guys, Africa's really huge. To get rid of 35% of the landmass of Africa to make those fit, that's a lot of land to get rid of.
I know you just discussed this, but earlier today I had seen somebody posted something on their social media that was on their Instagram that was a link to a post on Instagram. And oftentimes I see this with people my age, especially my grade, and my friends especially. They'll put like their political beliefs, not political necessarily, but their beliefs on posts on Instagram. And I clicked on this specific one actually earlier, like on one of our breaks, and I was reading it, and I was really challenged by it, and I wanted to ask your opinion on it.
Okay.
So I can just read you one of the slide. And I know we already talked about it, but it deals with the LGBTQ community,
okay.
And it had challenged me in what it said. It's like 10 slides long, but I'm just going to read one of them that specifically challenged me. It says, in quotes, "Love the sinner, hate the sin," is a phrase that's been baked into modern Christianity, despite never appearing in any religious text. It's usually applied to LGBTQ people by Christians who think of themselves as accepting but not supportive. And in parentheses it says, which is not a thing, by the way. It says, homophobia is disguised as religious love or concern, is as dangerous, if not more, than outright, I hate queers, homophobia.
All right, so you got a few assumptions in there. One, they misassume that you can, use the phrase acceptance or something like that, and the way that you...
LGBT Christians who think of themselves as accepting but not supportive.
Accepting but not
is
supportive.
not a thing, by the way.
All right, so that's assumption number one, it is a thing. Again, this is the same narrative of, if I disagree with you, I hate you. That's simply a lie, period. There's a lot of things that my kid does at sometimes that I don't appreciate nor support the things that he does because it's going to get him hurt. But I still love him, and I'm still going to continue to reach out to my son. And so that in and of itself is just I don't know if it came from me or you, probably me. That's just a false narrative to start off with. And really, that's the foundational, the linchpin or the foundational statement in that slide is that particular statement. And so there's an entire drove of folks. In fact, there's a guy named Ricky Chalette that has a ministry that particularly focuses on that segment of society. And he's a clinical psychologist who came out of that worldview. And he was in same-sex relationships for years. And he addresses it really well, but he would say that pretty well everything in there is based on a false pretext. If you begin to push that with them, what I do with them is I'll find other people groups other than themselves and say, well, do you agree with this? But you're still friends with that person, and they hold that worldview. Why does that apply to you? Or why do you apply that standard to me, but you don't apply that standard to yourself as you interpret the world around you? Yeah, does that make sense?
Slides, it had said that, like, saying that, like, bringing up the sins of another person, it's saying that they're just going to the root that that's not a sin, that that's a part of who they are. It says you cannot love someone and ask them to change an integral part of themselves.
Again, they're buying into a lie that their identity is found primarily in this thing. And that's part of the reason I hit on that anytime I address this, because I know those narratives and have heard them time and time again, where I'm like, you're just simply wrong there. Like, you're created for so much more than that. That's not a core part of your being. God has a lot more in store, and they don't want to listen to that particular. That phrase in 2 Peter I mentioned earlier, willingly ignorant. That's where that starts to come into play some. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So, did the flood truly cover the whole earth? Because if there wasn't life on a certain part of the earth, would the flood still cover that area?
The flood, it specifically records in the scripture that it covered all of the earth. And so it would have covered all of the earth, Antarctica, the whole 9 yards. Now, there's not life in some areas now. Pre-flood, I think probably the whole earth had life on it. Now, only 3% is habitable by man and or animals, Antarctica, whatever. But pre-flood, it was all covered in probably life. Plant life, animal life, whole 9 yards. Does that make sense? Anything else?
I don't want to piggyback on this topic because I know that you've talked a lot about it, but you talked about how, having that assurance and giving them that, then what's the next step after that? What does that look like? What does it look like for somebody to come in to the church, and how do you support them without being, I'm not judgmental, I try to love everybody, but at the same time, I just don't know, like, what if they want to be within the church? What if they want to be teaching my children? Like, how does all of that work?
So, and that is a very difficult line to walk. And so Lacey, she doesn't mind me using her name, she's in testimony now. Lacey was the girl I was talking about earlier. Lacey eventually did become a member of our church, and it was a tough walk, even though at that point in her life, she was really at a place of wanting to repent and turn from that. And so for her, it just wasn't the most loving thing I could do for her to put her in that position, and so I didn't. However, there's been other situations where we've had that happen in the church and had to exercise church discipline. And guys, church discipline, whether it's based around that particular topic or other topics, is always a difficult thing. It's one of the most heartbreaking things you deal with as an elder or a shepherd in a congregation. And so, yeah, it is a challenging thing where I just have to keep pointing them back to identity and say, hey, until we get to a place where you can truly identify your identity in Christ and have that be your key thing, I just don't think it's loving for me to put you in a position to teach others. And does that make sense? And I continue to love on them and continue to pour into them. And with some of them, they'll get offended at that point. And I guarantee you they're going to get a call from me within 72 hours and me saying, hey, but can I buy you a lunch again this week? Can I buy you coffee? Can we sit down and talk some more? Can I invite you to come hang out with my friends? Can I invite you to go out on our boat? Can I invite you? So I'm always going to be trying to engage. And that's all we can do. But at a certain point, we can't violate the biblical precept. And that's our plumb line. That's where morality is defined. Now, let me address this too. So the question, that leads to another question. The other question is, well, so they're struggling with that sin, but you're struggling with this sin over here, and it's fine for you to teach. Are you judging that sin different than that one? All right? You guys following that line of logic? Here's the key difference between those two things is, it's willing, habitual sin. There's a big difference between struggling against a sin and dealing with it and working to get victory in Christ and recognizing it as sin and pushing and fighting against it in the Spirit by the grace of God, and willingly, habitually walking in something that the Bible defines as sin. That's the difference between being able to teach and being qualified for ministry versus disqualified for ministry. Does that make sense?
Do you want to recommend some good authors or books for further reading on some of these topics that you've been hitting?
Yeah. So here's what's going to happen. I told you guys you'd get all the slides. So Justin has included me in an email with all your youth pastors and church leaders. And so I'm going to send a link that is, will take you to a website where you can download off my Dropbox every single slide that's been encountered today. But also in that email, I'm going to include a list of books and recommended reading for you guys to search out further. So you'll get more than you can possibly want to delve into. Guys, Sean McDowell, Sean and Josh McDowell's his dad, who wrote More Than a Carpenter, and then Sean McDowell's son. They're friends of ours. Their evidence that demands a verdict is about this big, and it is written textbook style. Guys, it is legit. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's not for everybody. But then you have books like Norm Geisler has a book that's called The Big Book of Bible Difficulties. And so it's like all the supposed contradictions in the Bible and all the questions that people deal with, they have issues with. He just goes through and systematically addresses all those things and has a good index in the back where you can look it up. And then Frank Turk's got some good stuff. His communication style is a bit rough for me, but his books are pretty good. William Lane Craig, man, that guy's... So William Lane Craig, one of the big skeptic websites, anti-Christian websites, there's an article on there that is titled, "None of Us Are Qualified to Debate William Lane Craig." Like, this guy just trounces them in this, because he's just such a good debater. There's one thing to have all the information stored in your head. It's another thing to be able to take that information, compress it, and form it into an argument on the fly. And William Lane Craig is just very good at that. I'll include a whole list of books for you guys to follow up and read on all this stuff, and websites where you can go find information. All right. Any more questions before I transition to the last thing? Okay.
So, obviously, as you can see, humans crave that knowledge. Did we crave that knowledge after Eve ate the apple, or did we crave that knowledge beforehand? Because, Adam and Eve were just in the garden. They just kind of accepted until Eve. And then...
It's a good question.
Yeah, and then I don't know, this might verge off, but is the reason why Christians crave more knowledge now is because the world is also craving knowledge, and we need to be able to know the answers, the real true answers to their arguments.
Okay, so first off, we can only speculate about Adam and Eve's mental state to some degree, because we can't imagine what it's like to live in a perfected body without sin and to walk in that perfected body in the garden with God for whatever the duration of time was that it happened. And so it's pure speculation at that point. However, there are things that God seems to have pre-wired into all of us as human beings, separated by thousands of miles, different cultures, different belief systems. There's a common set of morals that seem to be innate in all of us that frankly defies evolution in and of itself. But there's also that seeking after knowledge and that curiosity that all of us have as humans. I can only speculate as to why it is that God wired that in there, because there's not a scripture that flat tells us. But I would say that God put that in every single one of us, because that curiosity drives us to seek a higher truth, and a truth that supersedes ourselves and what we can know in and of ourselves. And that truth ultimately leads to Him. And I think that's why that's built into us. I think the enemy twists a lot of that stuff. Now, that naturally leads to a question then, too, on God's wiring us and why we're wired the way. And it's tied in with even the homosexuality and the predisposition towards addiction, is what about all the brokenness and sin that we do see in the world? All right? How does a perfect God, a loving God, allow things to get in such a way that they are the way they are in the world today, where He has to wire curiosity into us so that we might seek Him out? And so I've had a few different people. First off, people say, well, why do God make an earth with tornadoes and hurricanes and things? First off, I think those are probably byproducts of the flood, after the flood. I don't think we had those things before then. It didn't even rain before the flood. So probably didn't have those things. Same with earthquakes and volcanoes and all that, what they consider acts of God on your insurance policy. And so that's all part of the, and here's the illustration I use for that. Let's assume for a moment that Honda was capable of producing an absolutely perfect Honda Accord, right? It's not possible. But I owned a car dealership for years, let me tell you, not possible. But let's assume for a moment that they could produce a perfect car. And at a certain point, though, they produce this perfect car, and at a certain point, someone's going to come along, and they're going to take ownership of that car, right? You, me, whoever, going to the store and buying this car, right? Or the dealership. And now we're going to look at a picture of that car. Usually I have a slide for this when I give this talk. And it's this Honda Accord bashed into a tree, and the headlights over here, and this is over here, and and all the stuff. And I'm like, well, why in the world would Honda make a Honda with the windshield like that? You can't even see out of it, and the headlight's way over there. And you'll look at me like, well, stupid, Honda didn't make the car that way. Somebody drove it into a tree. And that's what's happened with our world and our creation and ourselves and our own bodies. God made a perfect world. He made the perfect car. But at a certain point, he says, Adam, I give you dominion over this creation, and I want you to go forth and subdue it. And you know what Adam did? He drove the car into a tree. And then we want to blame God for all the suffering and the fact that the car's jacked up when we're the ones who drove it into the tree. Does that make sense? So the problem of evil and suffering, and why does evil and suffering exist there? Because we drove it into a tree. And then we want to blame God for it being jacked up when we're the ones who did it. We're the culprits. Anyhow, I digress. Anything else before we transition? One last talk? Go ahead, Autumn. Talk loud. Great question. So how did animals get to the other continents after the flood? All right. So, into the flood, it talks about, and the valley sank down, and the mountains rose up. I've quoted that to you guys a few times now, right? And so this is just speculation based on the scientific data that we have in front of us. Guys, we know the Ice Age happened because we can see evidence of glacial movements coming as far down as this region even of the country. All the way down to KC, we can see where glaciers scrape the bedrock. Terra Morae, which is the type of soil stirred up on the front end of a glacier as it moves, it's there. We can see the glacial line. So at one point, ice came all the way down to this place, right? Now, there's a whole other thing that I have like 500 slides on that we don't have time to talk on about that. But at one point, you have to fit the Ice Age into the biblical narrative then. The Ice Age had to take place sometime because we see evidence, right? So it happened in the last 6,000 years. So I think what happened was somehow, and there's a whole, again, 500 slides I can cover in this, as part of the flood and the mechanism that God caused to use the flood, or to have the flood happen, what broke open the fountains of the great deep, there was a lot of ice buildup at the poles. And there's a whole thing with the Meissner effect that we observe and all that, but we don't have time for that. So I think, guys, when the water first receded off from the flood, do you know where I think the original beach line was likely at? Because I mentioned the oceans are essentially large sinkholes that formed when all that water came from under the crust of the earth and then it sank down. It's the continental shelf. So if you look at a map of the ocean's floor, it goes out for a long way off the coast of America is a good example. Off the east coast of America, you'll see it go out and then it drops off really steep. That was probably the original coastline where the water went to, but you had a lot of ice that obviously has melted since then because it's all the way up near the Arctic Circle now. And so all that ice melts, it forms the Great Lakes, it begins to form the Mississippi River. But as that ice melts, eventually where's all that water going to end up? In the ocean, which is going to raise the ocean level. All right, but if you go to just post-flood, if you look at if the ocean's level really was where the continental shelf is, guys, all the continents are connected. You could walk to Australia. You could walk to wherever. And guys, I was talking between sessions. Apparently, you're a runner. So we were talking between sessions about the atmospheric change. All right, so guys, here's the thing. If we are in a hyperbaric environment with a higher oxygen density, and what happens is eventually your hemoglobin gets oxygen saturated. Bad deal for you right now. It's called oxygen toxicity, and it'll kill you. But if we were adapted to that, What happens when your hemoglobin becomes oxygen saturated is you can run forever and never get tired. You only have to stop to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom. Because when you run, you start breathing hard and your muscles start lactating acid and all those processes begin to take place. Much of that is due to a lack of oxygen. And so how do they move across continents quickly and populate all these places in the hundreds of years? So in those lineages I showed you on that chart, what you'll notice is post-flood, people were still living a long time post-flood, not as long as pre-flood. And then the lifespan starts shortening down. See, what's going to happen with that atmospheric pressure is we're going to start losing it post-flood. There's a whole other set of slides. But also, when that ice starts melting into the oceans, cold water absorbs gases faster than warm water does. It's going to be absorbing the oxygen density that's in our atmosphere. What we'd expect to see, given that data point, is lifespans are going to begin to shorten for us and for animals alike. Well, it's interesting. In those lineages that it talks about, and it says such and such begat such and such, or begat such and such, and all those names you don't want to pronounce and stuff, right in the middle of one of those lineages that's listed in the Old Testament, it just has the guys' names until these two, Peleg and Joktan, right in the middle of those. And it says Peleg and Joktan, and it's two brothers, and it never mentions the brothers. It always just mentions the firstborn. And in this particular incident, it mentions the brothers. And it gives the meaning of both of their names. And one of their names is the shortening. And right at their time, you see the lifespans go and get short. And the other one, his name means the separation. And then it goes on in the scripture, says, for in his days was the earth divided. So I think what happened was at that point, that water level rose, also absorbing the oxygen, which shortened people's lifespans, but also divided the earth at that point, because now you can't walk to Australia and you can't walk to Indonesian islands. You can't get to those places by foot. Does that make sense? Sorry, I just condensed like 500 slides worth of stuff into that. So, I can put that in the link if you guys would like those slides, yes. Guys, I'll just tell you, so today we've covered about 500 slides on the topic of creation, evolution, science in the Bible, and authority of Scripture. I have somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000 slides. We just scratched the surface today. So that's all we have time for. All right? All right, question? Why did God make different languages? All right, so initially everybody spoke the same language. You see in that same period, in the Peleg Joktan period of history I just mentioned, that's also in the biblical timeline about when the Tower of Babel would have taken place. And so at this point in history, everybody spoke the same language, but they wanted to try to build a tower into heaven, and they wanted to try to exalt themselves or put them in God's place. And so what did God do? God humbled them. He said, all right, I'm going to confuse your language. And so he separated the languages out right at the same time the floodwaters rose that separated them geographically. And so now these different cultures and different language groups start cropping up more and more throughout world history, which falls in line with what we see in the evidence of languages from our world history.
How do we have different races?
Races. All right. So Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve would have been genetically perfect. This is pre-sin, right? And from there, what you get, and again, this is not Darwin's evolution, this is microadaptation, is what you're going to get is, first off, the degradation of sin begins to take hold. You guys know you can marry, who did Adam and Eve's kids marry? Brothers and sisters, right? Because who else is there? And so they married siblings, but it wasn't a problem. They could reproduce with siblings just fine and not have offspring that had genetic mutations. Because at this point, the genetic line was still pure enough that they didn't have those issues. But then, you could actually marry your brother and sister all the way until the days of Moses, when Moses gave the law. And that's when it became wrong to marry your brother and sister. I think at that point, genetically, there were enough issues. We had developed enough degradation due to sin in our genetic line that now you've got problems. So the reason, guys, you can't marry your sister, by the way, other than there's a whole other reasons, but is so you have very similar genetics in a lot of ways to your siblings, which includes some of the mutations or malformations in your genetic code. And so if you produce offspring with them, the likelihood of that mutation becoming an issue or doubling up and forming it and coming out in the offspring is much higher than with someone that has a very different set of mutations. In other words, the DNA is so intelligent that it actually weaves itself together to help overcome mutations in the genetic line. So races. So here's where you deal with races is God separates everything with Tower of Babel. You got different languages that are happening now. These people groups are settling in areas with very different food, very different climates, all this sort of stuff. So I'm Irish, Irish and German. I burn easy in the sun, and I get cancer easier on my skin, right? So based on that data point, what we should expect to see is that you won't see a lot of red-headed ginger folks in the Sahara, Africa desert region, because we're going to roast and we're going to die. And now you can label that and say, oh, it's survival of the fittest, and there's some truth to that even. However, I'm still in the long run going to produce the same human offspring down the road. But more, whereas you go to the Germanic areas and you go where my family would have originated, they do well in that climate. And so I'm built like a Viking. So I'm going to do well there. And so, yeah, races begin to form out of genetic change that takes place due to sin nature just at work. And Satan has taken that and run with it full force to try to divide us in every way he possibly can. He tries to divide us by race. He tries to divide us by sex. He tries to divide us by language. On and on and on and on and on. He's perverting the things that God did, trying to make it into something it's not. The fact is, guys, there's only one race. That's the human race. Now, we have cultural differences, and we have differences in melatonin in our skin. It's not melatonin. That's the thing that makes you sleep. Melanin in your melatonin. My brain's getting tired. We have difference in melanin in our skin. But at the end of the day, we're all still human. And I mean, it's for us to draw those lines. I think it's a cultural line. It's not you just have a difference in pigment in your skin. Guys, you realize that the genetic code that determines the entirety of your external appearance. The entirety of your external appearance. That's eye color, hair color, size of your nose, your ears, everything. Is 0.00005% of your genetic makeup. That's what we're arguing over. 0.00005% of our genetic makeup. I have to count the zeros every time in my head. Of our genetic makeup is determined for our whole external appearance. Yeah. Anything else?
What would have happened if Jesus would have sinned while he was on earth?
That's a question like, can God move the immovable object type thing? Like it's in total violation of his own character to sin. And so it's just not a possibility. Does that make sense? Now, what would have happened, theoretically, is he would no longer have been a substitutional sacrifice for all of us, because he'd have to pay for his own sin. And so he had to live a sinless life in order to be a substitutionary sacrifice for us on the cross. It was the only way it was possible. And that's why only he could do it, because only he wasn't corrupted by the sin nature that's passed down, because in Adam all die, is what the scripture says. He was the only one that was capable of living a sinless life. Does that make sense?
Some people ask me, why don't miracles still occur? Why can't people still heal people?
Okay, so why do miracles still not occur? First off, the assumption to the data, miracles still occur. In fact, I'll share a couple of those if we get time here in just a minute in what I was going to say in closing. Miracles still occur. I do think that by and large, that whole passage I quoted earlier about if you have faith as a mustard seed, you tell this mountain to be cast in the sea and be done for you. I think by and large, our culture as a whole has really jaded us towards the spiritual and the supernatural and made us fairly desensitized to that. You go overseas and you are in tribal cultures where the spiritual realm is a very real thing to them, and you do see miracles taking place. And I say miracles, I mean dead being raised, sick being healed, I mean, stuff that we as Southern Baptists, we don't want to talk about as much, but the fact is it's happening, and I've seen it happen. And so, yeah, miracles are strong. And guys, we overlook one miracle all the time in the church in America that happens every day: the conversion of the human heart. Man, that God takes a wicked sinner and begins to conform him to his image. That's a miracle in of itself. It's a miracle that psychology and therapy cannot explain. And yet it happens in front of us all the time. We overlook that miracle a lot. But the fact is, miracles are still happening. Man, they're happening a lot. Guys, in the Middle East, we have people coming to Christ through visions and dreams on a regular basis. God showing up, doing miracles. So my first pastorate at a Southern Baptist church, and I kind of knew the stereotype that Southern Baptists had, and I took a bunch of kids to Mexico, and God showed up in a mighty way. And we brought 500 Bibles with us to Mexico. And when we had passed about the 800 Bibles distributed mark, I ran out of physical explanations as to how it is this was happening. And we gave out over 1,100 Bibles when we brought 500 Bibles on the trip. I watched it. The chairman of deacons at our church watched it. I thought for sure, I'm going to get fired when I get home because Jesus is doing miracles. And but I got home. The chairman of the deacons is like, guys, Bibles were showing up. I mean, there's no way to explain this. And we gave out box after box of Bibles, and we know I was there. I loaded the Bibles. We had 500 Bibles. We gave out over 1,100 of them. We saw over 1,000 people come to Jesus in a week's time. I'd never seen that on one of those Mexico trips. We had enough money to buy 75 bags of food. It's rice, beans, and oil and stuff. And so I went to Sam's Club in Juarez. They have it there. And I bought the food, and we gave out over 150 bags of food, and I still have no explanation as to how that's possible. We still left enough rice and beans and a huge set of bags for the church to do a big potluck the next week. I have no explanation for that, outside of God showed up and did it. That's the thing. So she's asking how we give out that many if we only had that many. So I had 500. The end of the first day, we'd given out over 300, and I thought, I need more Bibles. I need to find some more Bibles. So I start calling every church in El Paso and every church in Juarez I can think of, going, hey, do you have Bibles? I need Bibles for this mission team. I'll buy them from you. I'll find money to get them. Nobody had Bibles. They're all like, man, we're all having the same problem. In fact, I had a guy from a prison ministry come up to me the third night after I should have been out of Bibles, and he's like, man, we really need Bibles for the prison ministry right now. Do you have any Bibles? I'm like, man, you can look in my bus, but I think we're pretty far out of Bibles. And so I open the bus up. He comes out with a huge box of Bibles in his hands. Well, can I have these? I'm like, yeah, you can have those Bibles. No idea where those just came from. And then one of the nights, I told all the students at the end of the night, we should have, again, this is as we're at the 700 Bible mark. I'm like, hey guys, gather all the Bibles up from your backpacks, get everything out. So we get them out. We got a stack about yay high of Bibles left. That's it. And so we've cleaned the bus out. You clean the bus out every day when you got college students and youth in it every day. And so I'm the only one with the bus key. I lock the bus up. It's Mexico. And so I lock the bus up, and the next morning I go out. You start the bus early because, it's hot, Mexico. And so I go to turn on the AC, but I open the bus doors and look, and sitting right behind my driver's seat at the top of the stairs are 2 brand new boxes of Bibles addressed to Elmdale Baptist Church in Springdale, Arkansas. And I'm like, I'm out of explanations now. So finally I just stopped trying to explain it and just kept giving Bibles out and kept having people led to Christ. Miracles are still happening. So let me talk a little bit about that. That's a good segue. Let me segue into what I want to talk on in the end. Guys, all this information is fine and dandy and good, and I really do hope that it is an encouragement for you in your faith, that you can trust the Bible and what it says. But at the end of the day, guys, it's really about what you do with it from here that matters. And so when I came to Christ, as I said to you guys, I could have easily logicked and said, hey, how many missionaries could I support down the road? Or how much influence could I have for the kingdom of God if I continue down the path I'm going and go to law school and go to Harvard and get a Harvard education? Good logic, right? But there was a guy named Charles Spurgeon. He's also nicknamed the Prince of Preachers. And Charles Spurgeon, I'll paraphrase him, he once said, if God's called you to be a servant, don't lower yourself by becoming a king. All right? The highest thing that we can walk in our lives is what it is that God has called us to do. You know what my job was, by the way? I went from a 6-figure-a-year job, and I worked for the U.S. government and did all this, was a sniper and did all this. You know what my job was my first year in mission school? I was a dishwasher. That's what they assigned me to for my job. Best thing I could have done with that year, learning to serve people and wash dishes and take care of people. That was my job my first year in missions. Now, I went and did other things overseas and all that, but when we were home, I was a dishwasher. I washed dishes for all 3 meals. You see, it's easy for us to use logic as we make decisions in our lives and what we should do, whether we should play sports, what we should major in, what do we go to school for, who do we marry. We can use a lot of logic in those things, guys, and we can measure success by all the wrong measurement sticks in our life. We talked a lot about Noah today, all right? What was Noah's primary job? It wasn't shipbuilder. He was a preacher. Noah had 7 converts in 120 years, and they were all family members. Us in the Southern Baptists, we would have asked him to step down a long time ago as a missionary. Buddy, you are ineffective. In fact, that seems a little cultish, you and your family members. Obviously, God had another measurement of success. You move forward through history, you get to Jeremiah. What we call him in theological circles is the weeping prophet. You know why we call Jeremiah the weeping prophet? Nobody listened to him. Nobody. His own fellow ministers wanted to assassinate him at one point. Nobody listened to him, yet we're talking about him today. Or you go through history some more and try to use the same measurements of success that we use for life. Popularity, students in school. Popularity, acceptance, all these things, or adults. Things that we use to measure success in ministry. So let's look at Jesus as the measuring stick here. He's supposed to be the measuring stick, right? During his incarnation, at one point, yeah, he had a lot of people following him, but they all abandoned him in the end. He had to tell one of his closest followers, you're going to deny me 3 times before the sun rises. And get behind me, Satan, which is kind of rough on Peter. But in the end, things that we view as successful in life and ministry, like writing books. Jesus wrote one thing, guys, and it was in the sand. And we don't even know what it was. It was gone 5 minutes later. He never traveled the world. He never left more than 150 miles from where he was born. And yet this is God incarnate come to dwell among us. And so I say all this to say, guys, to challenge you that as you make decisions, even now in your life, how many of you guys are at least 9th graders? All right? You're making decisions as 9th graders. The fact is, you're in high school. Your transcript follows you to college. You're making decisions now that are going to affect the rest of your life. But you need to recognize on the onset of all this, and this counts for everybody, even you younger than 9th grade, your life is not your own. Your decisions are not your own. You're just a steward. And so early on, I came to Christ. There was a music artist back in the 80s and 90s. You kids will have no clue who she is, but you old people will. Twyla Paris. And so Twyla Paris's dad discipled me when I came to Christ. Twyla and Jack are good friends of mine. They live about 3 minutes from me. Twyla's dad played in our wedding, which was held at your old building, Community Bible. We got married in Community Bible, and her dad was the one who played the piano for our wedding. But he discipled me when I came to Christ. And one of the things he told me early on, he said, Chris, your life is not your own. You're bought at a price. Everything you have, are, or ever will be belongs to Jesus. He said, and those things primarily break into these 5 areas. I've added one since then, the 6 T's, because again, Baptist T, And so that's your time, your talents, your thoughts, your trust, your treasure, and your temple. That's your body. You're just a steward of these things. Students, adults, both, listen to me. Your time is not your own. It's Jesus's. So ask yourself, when you go to sit down and binge watch Netflix for 10 hours a day or play video games for 12 hours a day, is this really how Jesus wants me to spend this time? If the time's really His, is this really what I should be doing with this time? Or when you go into next summer, so you're closing out a summer now and you're going into your school year, right? Let me just submit to you that maybe, just maybe, God could have better plans for you for your next summer than what you realize. That maybe, just maybe, God might call you to go be a witness for Him, either here locally, somewhere else in Kansas, in the U.S., or maybe even overseas on a mission trip. Because your time's not your own. And you're going to try to use pragmatism, which is that thought of whatever's practical, to say, well, it makes more sense for me to get a job to make some money this summer for whatever. And let me just tell you, that may not be what God's called you to. It made a lot of sense for me to go on to Harvard Law, but that's not what God had called me to. Your time's not your own. Your talents, God knit you together in your mother's womb. Some of you guys have some amazing talents. You guys singing on stage, by the way, like, I know where my talents lie, and don't lie, you don't want me to attempt to lead worship in front of you, I promise. All right? He put that in you for a reason, that you might bring glory to His name. Your thought life, that's the biggest one for me, where my battleground is these days. This is my thought life. But we're supposed to take every thought captive under the lordship of Christ. And as you go into this fall semester, there's a battleground for your mind. Did you know that companies spend millions upon millions of dollars to figure out how to manipulate your little minds? Do you realize that? They're spending millions of dollars to figure out how to make you notice something on your Facebook feed versus the other thing. They are spending millions of dollars to get into your head and to manipulate your thoughts. And a lot of that's towards things which are not godly. I use a phrase often. I got in trouble for using it in church once. Pornado. It's like pornography, but tornado. There's something you're doing that's causing your mind to get in this cycle where you start thinking in a way that you shouldn't. Because you didn't wake up that morning thinking, oh, I can't wait to fall into sin. Like, that's just not how Christians typically work, right? But at a certain point, something triggers your mind to start thinking that way, and then you get sucked in. And so what I tell students often is you need to identify what are those triggering things that trigger you to go that route, and take those things captive. You know, Jesus at one point is casting demons out of a guy, and demons, plural, out of a guy. And so anyhow, he's casting demons out of a guy, and Jesus said this. He says, it does no good to clean the house and yet leave it empty, lest 10 more come back in its place, and it's worse than it was to begin with. Guys, that's the way our thought life works. You ever try not to think about something? You're not just going to empty your mind. Right? You have to fill it with something else. That's what a lot of today was about. I basically had you get a drink from a fire hydrant today of information, right? Just gushing past you. You get the mental image, you know? But you got to fill it with something else. So again, going through those, your time, your talent, your thoughts, your trust, your treasure, your temple, those things all belong to Him. So what might He be calling you to do this semester? And let me just predict what the mental roadblocks are. And we'll close out with these mental roadblocks, and I'll challenge you in the end, okay? So a few of these mental roadblocks, one of them I mentioned was the pragmatism thing, which, you know, is just being practical. Oh, I should probably use my time to go do this or that, or whatever's the thing that might net me out some money or whatever. Guys, again, God may call you something else. When it concerns witnessing to people or going on missions, well, I don't feel qualified to do that. I don't feel like I'm going to have, like, I can't communicate the gospel the way Chris communicates the gospel in front of you guys. Guys, my first mission trip, I just learned what the New and Old Testament was. I knew very, 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 very little about the Bible the first times I went to preach. In fact, one of the first times, talking about fear, I already mentioned to you guys, I get afraid of public speaking. First time I ever preached, I was at an African-American church where I was the only white boy in the room, and I didn't know, I didn't grow up in the church, so like I didn't realize, I thought that TV was making fun of African-American churches when they had people like waving handkerchiefs and yelling, "Amen, brother!" People banging on the piano. I thought that was exaggerated. I didn't know it was real. And so I get my first line out of my memorized sermon. I memorized every word I was going to say because I was terrified. I get my first line out, and somebody's banging on a piano behind me, and people were screaming things, and I completely forgot my sermon. I'm like, what is happening? And so, by the grace of God, the second time I preached, guys, I was in front of 400 homeless men in a homeless shelter. And take in mind, I grew up around homeless shelters. My parents were addicts. We lived in homeless shelters. And I was about right there from the pulpit, and this crazy thing happened with this guy that I think might have been demon-possessed. It was really weird. But anyhow, I'm watching this craziness go down with this one guy, and the guy who runs the homeless shelter walks over and whispers in my ear and says, hey, the guy that was supposed to preach didn't show up, so you're preaching today. And before I can look at him and go, I got nothing, man. I've only preached one time ever. This guy's introducing me on stage. I've got the 5 seconds from here to here to figure out what am I about to preach a sermon on in front of 400 plus people. I could not have felt more unqualified. I couldn't have been more. It wouldn't matter how I felt. I was unqualified. I couldn't have been more unqualified to get up there and preach the word. And all that came to mind was from the book of Revelation, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So I just shared my testimony and talked about how God had changed my life and the background he brought me out of and all this. And at the end, I'd never seen an altar call. I didn't know how to do that. And so I'm like, well, I guess, if you want to know about Jesus, just come talk to me afterwards. I didn't do, every head bowed and every eyes closed. I didn't know that. I didn't grow up around that. And so I closed my eyes to start praying. I start hearing a bunch of movement. All right, guys, you don't do the job I used to do and grow up in the environment I do and hear a bunch of movement from a bunch of drug-addicted men in a room and not open your eyes. So I open my eyes, and there's this flood of men coming forward, and I'm thinking, oh, they do this every week. They got to come forward to go to the next room where the food and cots are. And then I see the guy who runs the homeless shelter with a deer in the headlights look on his face of what is happening. And I realize, oh, God's showing up. These people are coming to Jesus. That's what's happening. And so we start grabbing. First guy I grabbed, by the way, he was a doctor. Lost his wife and kid, lived on the streets for 2 years because he just couldn't handle the loss. Became a drug addict and an alcoholic. He got radically saved that day. He bought out the rest of the block. He owned a whole practice outside the city. Bought out the rest of the block and put in a clinic for those men. God got a hold of him radically. Guys, I was 22 years old at the time, had preached one sermon ever in my life. I couldn't have been more unqualified for that. The first time I was in the Middle East sharing the gospel with Muslims, I'd been saved months. There's a phrase that we use that's kind of trite in Christendom. God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. So yeah, that's one of the mental roadblocks you're going to get. Oh, I don't have the right words. I don't know how to present the gospel or whatever. Just share your testimony. Just share what God's already doing in your life. And if not in your life, hey, let me tell you a story about this other guy I heard about. Share somebody else's testimony for that matter. But share how God changes lives. That's all it takes. And then you run into the thing of like, oh, well, what if they reject? Guys, first off, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting Jesus. You need to get that through your head in sharing the gospel. They're not rejecting you. But on facing rejection, let me tell you a quick story. Sorry if I go over by a few minutes here. After all this talking, I'm going to go over at the very end. Guys, there's a guy named Watchman Nee who was a missionary in China for years. And at one point, Watchman Nee's sitting in a Chinese prison, and they keep busting these house churches that are growing rapidly all over China, and they keep finding these letters from this guy, Watchman Nee, dated for dates that he's sitting in prison. And so they're like, how is he getting these letters out to disciple and encourage the churches? And so eventually they can't figure it out. It's because he's leading the guards to Christ, by the way, and they're taking the letters to the churches and joining the churches. They can't figure it out, so what they do is they change the rules. They say, no one's to guard him more than once, and you rotate every 6 hours. Do you know what happened? The letters kept going out. In 6 hours, talking through the bars from a cell to a hardcore communist Chinese guard, these men were still accepting the message of Jesus being conveyed through this man. They were delivering the letters, and the captain of the guard eventually ended up in the cell next to him for professing Christ. And you're worried about getting rejected by the people sitting next to you in the classroom? Or in your workplace, adults? Guys, don't worry about rejection. Just share the gospel. Let God bring forth the fruit. It's not even up to you to bear the fruit. It's up to him to bring forth the fruit. It's up to you to share and be obedient. I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with it. Another thing about me, not only am I afraid of public speaking, guys, I don't like large social crowds, just to be honest with you. I deal with social anxiety. And yet my job is for me to consistently be in front of people. Guys, for 7 years, I preached on average of 7 times a week. 2 of those times were on TV. 7 years. Surprised I didn't get ulcers by the time it was done. But it's because, and Paul said this. He says, I labor harder than any of you, yet not I, but the grace of God in me. It's the grace of God at work in us, guys, to accomplish His good works. Right? It's not just us. So another one of those roadblocks that people talk, provision, talking about mission trips. Guys, I just told you a story about God providing Bibles. First mission trip I was ever supposed to go on, I had no Christian friends and family to raise support from. I was $506 to be exact short to be able to go on my first trip overseas to the Middle East. I've been saved for about 5 months at that point. And everybody's telling us bye. We're doing the stateside trip first. They're telling us bye. And this girl slips a check in my hand. And I knew she was a pretty broke missionary too, frankly. And so I didn't expect much of that check, and I slid it into my pocket, and then I forgot about it. And we're leaving like at 3 a.m., and this is at 9 o'clock at night. Well, about 11 o'clock at night, I've had my bags packed in faith because I really believe God's called me to go on this trip. But now I'm feeling stupid because I'm like, I still need $506. Where am I going to get that? It's 11 o'clock at night. We leave in 4 hours. And I remember we lived in a trailer, this ratty little thing, but I'm leaning against the counter, and I put my hand in my pocket, and I was like, oh, yeah, that check, which I really thought was $20 or something. And I pull it out, and this girl had written this check. Nobody had access to these records except my team leader. And I asked him later, like, did you tell somebody? He's like, no, of course not. That's confidential. This check is written for $506. And I go to this young missionary when we get back in the country and say, why did you write that check for $506? She said, somebody unexpectedly gave me some money, and that was a large portion of it, but I could not get that number, and I could not get your face out of my mind as I prayed. I eventually just had to write you a check for $506. Where God guides, He provides, guys. He will provide if He's called you to do something, whether it's locally or somewhere else. Safety. I hear this one a lot because I go to the Middle East a lot. Guys, let me just give you a couple verses about safety real quick, okay? I'm sorry I'm going over. Is this okay that I'm going a few minutes over? Are you guys okay? All right. So let me give you a couple of verses about safety and missions, all right? Just to encourage you here about God's protection on the mission field. Luke 21, verse 16, second half of that verse. And some of you they will put to death. Encouraging, right? Here's your encouraging mission statement. You'll be hated by all for my name's sake. More encouragement, right? And then you get to the last part. But not a single hair of your head shall perish. Now that's the encouragement part. And then you go to the book of Revelation. And there's these seals being broken on the scroll, which is another whole other cool thing there. But the fifth seal's being broken. And let me read what happens there. And he opened the fifth seal, and I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God. These are people who have been martyred. And for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to them, and it was said to them they should rest a little longer. In other words, hey guys, hang out a little bit longer. Until the full number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed was completed. God already knows right now. This is the book of Revelation in the end times. He already knows exactly who and how many of the faith. He already knows the number. And He's telling them to wait until it's complete. Now let me just put this out there. I think my battery's dying. Let me just put this out there. It is not outside the realm of possibility that some of us standing right here will be among those voices at the end times in the book of Revelation crying out, saying, How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? And that is okay. Quick thing that I said to Shawnee once when we were dating. I don't know if she's ever told you guys this. She asked me about retirement because I was a broke missionary and I had no money and no retirement plan. And so she said, what are you thinking about retirement? And I said, I don't know. I'll probably just fly to a closed country and preach the gospel till they kill me. It's shocking she still married me after that. But guys, I mean, why are you here? Remember that earlier I gave you that line of questions? And then what? And then what? And then what? Why are you here? What's your mission? Why are you doing what you do? Why do you go to school, adults? Why do you do what you do for a job? Why? What's the purpose of all of it? And coming back to that safety thing, let me just tell you, you're not guaranteed safety when you walk out that door to leave here in just a minute. Every time I take a mission team overseas, it's always in the back of my head that me or some of them may not come home from that trip. Every time, and that's okay. Because it's about obedience to Christ. I just wish once, guys, I present missions to so many people, it's part of my job, and I always get the safety, I always get the provision question, I always get the qualified question, I don't feel qualified. I wish just for once, instead of that series of questions, is it safe? Am I qualified? How am I going to get the money? Just once, I'd love to hear the first thing be, am I called? Because if the answer to that's yes, then the answer to the rest of those questions is absolutely irrelevant. If you're called, that's just all there is to it. You go. That being said, every single one of us are called to be missionaries in our local area, period. Students, you and your school are called to be a missionary. What does that look like? Remember earlier I talked about your concept of God directly determines how you live. What does that look like when you go back to your fall semester here in a matter of, when school start? Like next week or something? Week after next? 2 days ago. You guys already started? Oh, okay. Some of you guys have already started. So what does that look like, guys? And I'll close with this. It'll take me 2 minutes to convey this story. This was part of a sermon that was given to me my first time when I was overseas. Somebody slipped it in my CD case, which dates this story a little too. We don't carry big CD cases anymore. My Discman. I actually use precious cargo space to go overseas to carry a huge stinking CD case and CDs. So stupid. Anyhow, I'm sitting on the Black Sea coast, and I'm discouraged, and I'm tired, and I faced rejection all day, and my stomach's messed up because of the food. Food there is great. It's just bacteria is different. And I'm wiped out, and I'm questioning why in the world I'm in this country. And somebody had snuck a copy, they burned a copy of this old sermon and put it into my CD case. And at the end of this sermon, this guy, he says a lot of things in there that to this day still challenge me every time. I have all 56 minutes and 27 seconds of it memorized. I can recite the entire thing to you down to his voice inflection. But he recites this story at the end. And this story is a story about a slave owner in the 1700s that had about 2,000 slaves in the West Indies sitting on this island. And this slave owner was an atheist. He said, I will not have any of that God nonsense on my island. If a clergyman is shipwrecked, I'll keep him apart till someone can pick him up, but I don't want that here. These two young Moravians, not much older than some of you, they were in their early 20s. These two young Moravians heard about this. And you know what they decided to do? They decided they're going to sell themselves to the slave owner. Guys, this is not like 4 years of indentured servitude. They're selling themselves to a lifetime of slavery to go live and be Christians among these slaves brought from the heart of Africa to live and die in the West Indies without ever hearing the name of Jesus. And they just say that is unacceptable. And so they sell themselves to this man. Guys, these young people, you guys have dreams and aspirations, things you want to do. You want to get married one day. You want to go to college. They had those same aspirations. They had those same dreams and things that they wanted to do with their lives and things they thought they might do with their lives. But now God has called them to something bigger and greater that defies all logic. And they're going to sell themselves and they're going to go live on an island as slaves for the rest of their lives. And they're in the harbor in Hamburg, near Germany there, and they're pulling out of the harbor. You think their parents were questioning the wisdom of their decision? Are you sure God has called you to this? Like, wouldn't you as a parent, like I'm thinking about Hudson doing that, like, are you sure you heard the voice of the Lord? Like, this is a pretty serious deal. Are you sure this is what God's called you to? And they're crying, and they're there watching their two boys get on this ship. The slave owner wouldn't even pay for their passage there. They had to use money from selling themselves to pay for their passage to get to the island. And they're pulling out of the harbor, and one of those young men put his arm around the other, and he said a phrase that, guys, to this day is my mission statement in life. And it has been since March of 2001, the first time I heard this sermon. This young man put his arm around the other one. He raised his fist in the air, and he said simply this: may the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. And that's it. May the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. May Jesus receive the reward of his suffering through our obedience and through our worship and through our adoration and, frankly, through us sharing about what he did on the cross with others. So, guys, that's what you do with all this information from today. Amen? Let me pray for you and I'll close out. Father, I thank you for each and every one of the people here. For all the information we convey, God, for the fact that we can trust your word, for the fact that you are faithful and true, and that you give us your word and you preserve it, that we might know you deeper and deeper. And I pray for all of us here that you give us a deeper glimpse of who it is that you are. And for any of us here that don't know you yet, God, that you would, by your Holy Spirit, bring that revelation and then have them go talk to somebody about what it is to follow this Jesus. And God, we ask all this ultimately not for our sake, but for your sake, that the Lamb that was slain might receive the reward of his suffering in us. In Christ's name and to his glory. Amen. Thanks, guys.
Hey, just a couple quick things before you go. First off, big round of applause for Chris. And now, if you really want to applaud for our Savior who saved him out of a house of drug addicts. A couple things I want to mention, just little things before you go. I promise I'll be brief. I know we're a little over. I definitely don't see it as a problem, though I see it as a bonus. But I think everything today was, again, the water from a fire hose is a lot. It was a lot. That's the benefit, is having everything recorded that we can come back to and slides that we can refer to. Just as you walk out of church on a Sunday, I hope what was taught to you on that Sunday isn't just Sunday. I really, really hope that for all of you, for me, for all of us. Same thing here. I hope everything today was not just today. That's my challenge to you, to do something with this, and to be encouraged to like Chris said, to do something with it more than just for you, but externally. It was thought-provoking and it was challenging. And regardless of whether we're young earth or old earth, that's really essentially not the point. The point is that we take the creation narrative and we share it, because that is the narrative that's being attacked. And it's important that we understand that our anchor is not school. It is the Bible. I taught science for 12 years across the street, for those of you that didn't know that. I had Christians and I had atheists as students in my classroom all the time. I struggled with my own belief system the entire time, and I was given textbooks that made statements just the same that he showed on those slides, and I had to teach from them. Do not attack your teachers. Do not do anything for them, but love them and pray for them, because they may be someone that needs to hear the gospel. Or they may be someone like me that didn't really quite understand or maybe even harness the gospel really well, because I was battling with these textbooks that were put in my hands too, and trying to honor God the best I could in teaching that material, but not really being certain about it myself. Those people in those school buildings love you, and they're trying their best. Your friends that don't understand it are trying their best. They need help. They don't need hurt. That's super, super important, especially as you go into your school year. Your identity is in Christ, period. Your identity is in Christ. Take that identity with you. The best thing I ever did as a teacher my last few years before God called me here was he called me to walk through the school building every day as his temple. As his temple. And what I did was I would spend my planning period walking and praying through the school year, or through the school building. And he did that because he made it so clear in me that I am his temple, and where I go, he shall go. And I made a point to make sure I went and brought him where I went. That is your call. And so when Chris mentions your mission field, that's your mission field for now. And it may grow or it may shrink. That's up to God. Your duty is to be obedient. And if it's really your duty, it will be your joy. Love others. Admire who they are. Admire that God has them in your life, and admire them as a created being of God. Give them the respect they deserve, but give them the love they could never deserve, the same that you have in Christ. Last thing I want to mention, invite them. The easiest thing you can do is invite them to a youth group. There are many youth groups around. This was called Truth Seekers Apologetics Conference. Our youth group starting up next Wednesday here in the basement is called Truth Seekers. That's our youth group name. We are calling people, we are inviting people that are interested in this truth. And so if you know someone, tell them about this one. Emmanuel has one on Wednesday nights as well. First Christian has one on Wednesday nights as well. Zion has one on Wednesday nights as well. Bring people to that. Bring your friends to that. Just come to this thing with me. That's all you got to say. If they're your friend, eventually you ask them enough times, they're going to cave. It's okay. I've attended something called Men's Encounter. We learned that. We just peck away at people until they finally come, because they're just going to say, all right, I'm going to go to this, so you shut up. But the thing they find out is they find something special there, and they realize, oh, that's why you never shut up. It's not because you wouldn't shut up. It's because you love me. And they'll find that out. Be willing to invite them, to invest in them, and to live life with them. You do that, and you will have more joy in your life, and you will have more purpose in your life and more meaning in your life, period. So I challenge you as you leave. Remember this stuff. Hopefully you talk to your youth pastors. If your youth pastor isn't Emmanuel or First Christian or Lifehouse, talk to me, and I can get your email connection and all that, because those are the ones in the email thread right now that are going to get the material, the opportunity to find the videos and to find the slides. And if you don't fit that group, that's okay. Just let me know if you need access to that. I will make sure you get it. Again, thank you so much for coming. I had no idea what I was doing to put this on, and I'm so excited. I really appreciate you coming, and I'm so thankful for what we could do. I'm so thankful that we could come together as so many different churches together and encourage each other as we leave. I don't think we can pray enough. I'll give one more short prayer, and then we're welcome to go. If there's any snacks out there, you're welcome to grab them on your way out. Thank you again for coming. I love you all greatly. Father, thank you so much for your son. Lord, thank you for the unity we have in Jesus Christ. Thank you for the security we have in Jesus Christ. Thank you for the eternity we have in Jesus Christ. But Lord, thank you also for the life we have now in Jesus Christ. Help us to live that life now in a way that shapes other lives, in a way that we can see you and others can see you, in a way that points them to eternity with you. Help us to walk, to not just absorb, but to pour out of each of us, you. We pray this in the power and the authority and the love of Jesus' name. Amen.